Göbekli Tepe is a hill in Turkey. It's about 12,000 years old. It's a temple complex, and it's advanced. It really shatters the story of human progress. The long-held story, because this was built by hunter-gatherers millennia before the pyramids, a monumental sanctuary, and then it was deliberately buried. This fact, this place, forces a re-evaluation of our past, the origins of society, of art and belief. It makes you ask what it means to be civilized. If our oldest ancestors were this capable, far more than we ever imagined, the landscape was the first sign that something here was different. Göbekli Tepe is up on this high ridge, with these sweeping views and constant wind. It's not near a river. It's not a place with rich soil or easy water, the kind of place you'd pick to start a farm. It was chosen for something else. For its presence, for how it stood out in that ancient world. People from the area had known the hill was unusual for a long time. They called it Potbelly Hill. Their animals would graze around these odd stones that stuck out of the ground, worn down like old bones. But what was really underneath that was a mystery. The Earth kept that secret. Then in the mid-90s, an archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, he came to the site. He'd read a short report about it. He saw those limestone slabs poking up, and he knew right away. They weren't natural. They were the tops of huge pillars, man-made, and they were unbelievably old. That realization changed everything. That quiet hill in Turkey became one of the most important finds anywhere. The first surveys just gave a hint of what was below. They mapped the tips of these massive T-shaped stones, set in clear circles. This wasn't a village. There were no houses, no hearths for daily fires, no trash pits. This was a sanctuary, a temple complex, and it was built over 11,000 years ago. The people who built it, according to everything we thought we knew, they should have been hunter-gatherers, just focused on survival. And that location, it made no practical sense. So it forces the question, why would nomadic people who followed herds, put that much colossal effort into this one place, this specific, impractical ridge? The answer was down there, buried with the stones, waiting. The radiocarbon dates came back from the site, and the numbers were staggering, 9,600 before Common Era. That's the very end of the last ice age. The world was still cold, vast grasslands where deserts are now, and humanity, we're told, lived in small, mobile bands. Their whole existence was the daily hunt, gathering what they could find. They followed the herds, no permanent homes. Technology was basic, we assumed. Their social world, simple. Göbekli Tepe was built in that world. Then you look at the monuments we use as anchors, Stonehenge on the English plains. Göbekli Tepe is older than Stonehenge by about 6,000 years. The Great Pyramid of Giza. Göbekli Tepe was already ancient ruins by the time the first stones of the pyramid were laid. It predates the pyramid by 7,000 years. That gap is an ocean of lost time. It's a chronological shock. The textbook narrative has always been clear. First, humans mastered agriculture. Farming created surplus food. That surplus let people settle down in villages. With settled life came specialization, social hierarchies, complex religion. And only then, with all that established, could societies build monumental architecture. Temples came after farms, gods came after grain. Göbekli Tepe stands that sequence on its head. This is the most sophisticated monumental architecture from its era, built by people who, by all evidence, did not farm. They didn't live in cities. They didn't have kings or bureaucracies. So how did they do it? The date forces that question. It's not a minor adjustment, it's a fundamental break. It suggests the human drive to create meaning, to come together for a purpose greater than daily survival, might be far more ancient than we credited. It asks us to look at those hunter-gatherers not as primitive precursors, but as architects of their own sophisticated world. What kind of belief could inspire that in an age of ice? The pillars are these massive T-shaped forms carved from solid limestone. They rise up from the floor of these circular spaces. They're monolithic. The biggest ones are over 18 feet tall, weighing more than 16 tons. That's like several pickup trucks, and they were set upright over 11,000 years ago. But it's the form that really gets you. They're not just rough stones. They've been worked into this precise shape, a capital T. The crossbar makes these broad, stylized shoulders. A lot of researchers see a stylized human figure in that. An ancestor, maybe, or a spirit, standing watch. They're not just posts, they're presences. Think about the process. First, quarrying the stone from the local bedrock. Using flint tools, cutting channels around a block until it was free, then moving it. The nearest quarry was hundreds of meters away, over rough ground. No wheels, no animals to pull sledges. Moving these megaliths was pure human coordination. Ropes, log rollers, brute strength, the work of many, many people. Once it was on site, the shaping began, carving that T-form, smoothing the surfaces, then digging a pit, tipping the pillar into place, standing it upright, securing it. And it wasn't alone. Each enclosure has a ring of these T-pillars with two even larger ones in the center. This was repeated, circle after circle across the hilltop. The scale of that labor changes things. It tells us these hunter-gatherers could plan projects that lasted seasons, maybe years. They could organize a workforce, feed them, motivate them toward a common goal. And this goal had nothing to do with immediate survival. This wasn't a shelter or a storage pit. This was building a cathedral. That shared purpose, the cohesion it required, it hints at a collective belief powerful enough to move literal mountains. It suggests the need to create meaning, to manifest the unseen in stone, might have been one of the first forces to bring people together in large, coordinated groups. The temple may have come before the town, and the belief that built it might have been the original architect of complex society itself. The pillars aren't just standing there. They're covered in animals, a whole world of them carved right into the stone. You see foxes, snakes coiled up, boars charging, cranes standing tall. Scorpions, lions, all of them done with such detail, such clear intention. This isn't random scratching. It's a deliberate act, a huge concentration of art, all in one place. And the animals themselves, they're almost all wild, dangerous, even. No sheep here, no cattle. This is a world of power, of the untamed. It's a hunter's world, not a farmer's. That tells you something. It gives you a window into how these builders saw the world. Their cosmos was filled with these powerful beings. These animals probably meant something deep. Maybe they stood for clans or spirits, forces of nature that had to be honored or appeased, something you'd invoke in ceremony. Then there's the sheer amount of work. Just think of the labor. They quarried these huge pillars, moved them, raised them, and then, after all that, artisans spent countless hours carving these images. Pecking them into hard limestone with flint tools, they poured their greatest creative effort here, not into everyday things, not into personal decoration. Into this place, this sacred space, that tells you something else. It tells you that symbolic expression, that communal ritual. It wasn't a side activity. It was central, it was the driving force, and that flips an assumption on its head. We usually think art and religion come later. First you secure food, shelter, then you have the luxury for temples, for elaborate art. Göbekli Tepe suggests maybe it was the other way around, that the compelling need to create meaning, to enact shared beliefs, to gather for ritual, that need itself might have been the original catalyst. The thing that made people coordinate, to plan, to work together over the long term. The temple didn't come from a settled town. Maybe the town eventually came from the needs of the temple. So these wild animals in the stone, they're more than decoration. They're like the spiritual architects of one of humanity's first great collaborations. But those pillars, those carvings, they needed more than just skill. They needed a whole society behind them, a system that could coordinate just the logistics of it. To cut a single pillar 16 tons from the bedrock, drag it across the site and stand it upright, that's a small army. Archaeologists figure hundreds of people working for weeks or months just for one stone. And Göbekli Tepe has dozens, arranged in circles built over centuries. That's the puzzle. Who organized it? Who decided where each pillar went? What animal to carve? How did they feed everyone? Where did they sleep? This wasn't something that just happened. It was planned, sustained. It means there were roles, specialists. Quarry workers who could get the stone out intact, sculptors who could turn it into art, people who understood leverage, balance, how to raise these things. And almost certainly organizers, ritual leaders holding the vision, directing the work. That level of coordination means a social structure, a hierarchy, even if it was temporary. Someone had to make decisions others would follow, and that's what really challenges the old story. The traditional model is straightforward. First, farming. Farming creates a food surplus. That surplus lets some people stop farming. They become priests, artists, chiefs. That's how you get social complexity. Temples come last. Göbekli Tepe flips that. Here, the temple comes first. The social complexity, organizing hundreds of people, comes not from a grain surplus, but from a shared spiritual purpose. Building this place might have been what forced these hunter-gatherers to find new ways to work together, to plan long-term, to develop specialized skills. And that leads to an idea. Maybe the effort of building and maintaining this site created a new problem, feeding all those people gathered in one place for so long. Maybe the need to support the temple builders is what pushed people to experiment, to cultivate wild grains deliberately, to plant and tend them for a more reliable food source right there. So agriculture might not have been the cause of civilization. It might have been a consequence, a practical solution to a spiritual problem. The temple didn't grow from the farm. The farm might have grown from the temple. There's this idea called the ritual center hypothesis. You picture the hilltop not as a town, but as a destination. A sacred place. Across the landscape, small groups of hunter-gatherers were living mobile lives, but at certain times, maybe tied to the seasons or the stars, they would all converge on this spot. They traveled from miles away, following old paths to Göbekli Tepe. They came for ceremony, not for trade, to gather in those stone circles, to perform rituals we can't really know. Stories by the fire, dances echoing off the pillars, feasts shared by thousands. It was a cathedral on the hill, long before anyone thought of a city. The scale of the architecture fits. Those huge enclosures weren't for living in. They were built to hold crowds, and the effort to build them suggests a shared belief, something strong enough to pull people across great distances. It formed a temporary society, a seasonal community, united by a purpose bigger than any single family or clan. Then you think about feeding everyone. If hundreds or thousands gathered for weeks, the local landscape couldn't support them just by hunting and foraging. The herds would be gone, the wild plants stripped. That creates a new problem, a logistical pressure. How do you feed a festival? The answer might be in the plants that grew wild around the site. This region is the original home of wild wheat and barley. The people gathering there knew these grains. They harvested them. But the pressure of the feast, the need for a predictable, storable food source ready for the next gathering, could have pushed them toward a new idea. Instead of just collecting what nature gave, what if they helped it, cleared some ground, saved the best seeds, planted them deliberately, so a harvest would be waiting when everyone returned? From that angle, agriculture starts to look less like a sudden invention and more like a practical solution, an answer to a social and spiritual challenge. The desire to sustain the ritual, to feed that community of believers, might have been the initial spark, so the first farms might not have been about private property or individual wealth. They could have been communal gardens cultivated to support the temple feasts. If this theory is right, it changes the motive behind one of humanity's biggest shifts. The Neolithic revolution, moving from foraging to farming, wasn't just about an easier meal. It might have been driven by the human need to come together, to believe in something larger, and to make that gathering possible. The grain followed the god, the farm served the faith, and the very roots of settled civilization might have been watered not just by practicality, but by a deep, shared sense of meaning. This magnificent sanctuary didn't stay open to the sky. Around 8,000 years before Common Era, something happened. Each of the stone circles was buried. Deliberately, carefully, filled with thousands of tons of soil, stone chips, animal bones. This wasn't a collapse, not violence or neglect. It was systematic. Ritualistic, a people hiding their own greatest achievement. Think of the labor. They quarried and moved those pillars to build it. Centuries later, they moved enough earth to bury it. A second colossal project, a mirror of the first. Why? Why go to such effort to erase your own masterpiece? This wasn't abandonment. The fill material tells a story. It wasn't random dirt. Archaeologists found tool-making debris, bones from vast feasts. The material came from the surrounding area, from the gatherings, the rituals that once animated the site. They were entombing it with the physical memory of its own use. Some researchers call it a sacred decommissioning. The beliefs that built Göbekli Tepe evolved over centuries. New ideas, new social structures, the old enclosures charged with power and memory couldn't just be left to crumble. They had to be retired, laid to rest with honor. It suggests a cyclical view of time and sacred space, that a place of power could have a lifespan, a purpose, and then a dignified end. This intentional burial is why we found Göbekli Tepe so perfectly preserved. The soil protected the carvings from erosion, from later rebuilding, from being quarried for other projects. It kept the secret for over 10,000 years. But it does more than that. It adds a final layer of intentionality to the story. These weren't people who just built and walked away. They engaged with their creation across generations. They made a conscious choice about its legacy, wrapping it in earth as if putting it to sleep. In covering it up, they were perhaps ensuring its stories, its power, would remain intact for a future they couldn't imagine. Our present, that burial kept something hidden, and what it held would eventually break the story we've been telling. For more than 100 years, the story of civilization's rise has been this step-by-step process. They gave it a name, the Neolithic Package. It's a clean story. It starts with agriculture, people figuring out how to plant seeds, how to herd. That created a surplus of food. And with that surplus, they could settle. They built the first permanent villages. Village life created new roles. Leaders emerged, priests, artisans. And with that social complexity came the need for grand temples, for gods. The architecture was like the final piece, built on a foundation of grain. It's logical: farming, then villages, then temples, a package delivered in order. Then Göbekli Tepe arrives and it shatters that sequence. Here, the final step is actually the first step. The grand architecture, the sophisticated art, it's all there over 11,000 years ago, built by people who weren't farming, who show no signs of living in a permanent town. The temple came first, the gathering, the ritual came first, so the package is torn open, the contents are scattered in a new order, a bewildering order. This forces a rethinking, the so-called Neolithic revolution. It can't be a single switch flipped from hunting to farming. It looks more like a mosaic. Different pieces developing alongside each other: social organization, ritual life, technology, resource management. They were all influencing each other. In unpredictable ways, at Göbekli Tepe, it seems the ideological piece was the catalyst, the drive to create a shared sacred space. That social glue, bringing people together to build, could have accelerated other changes. The need to feed those gatherings might have encouraged early cultivation. The coordination to move a 16-ton pillar would have refined leadership. Roles that later shaped village life, so the story isn't a straight line anymore. It's a web of interactions with belief and community possibly at the center. Pulling other innovations into being, what we labeled as the end result monumental architecture as a symbol of established power that might have been the starting engine. The first great leap might not have been about controlling plants. It might have been about answering a deeper need to belong to something larger and to build that belonging in stone. The ground has its own story. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have been looking at the soil for years, and the things that aren't there, they are as important as the pillars. There aren't any house foundations, no signs of permanent shelters. You don't find the central hearth you'd see in a village, the layers of daily trash. The site is clean of that. It's clean of domestic life. Instead, the tools are specialized. Fine flint blades, carving tools, and the animal bones, they're from huge feasts. Aurochs gazelle in massive amounts, butchered and eaten right there. So this wasn't a place for living. It was a place for gathering. That separation is a clue. It means these people had a sophisticated conceptual world. They had the space for the everyday and the space for the sacred, the profane and the profound. They lived out there somewhere in the landscape, probably small, mobile camps following the wild, but they came here to this hill for a purpose. It was a destination. A pilgrimage site before the word existed, and you think about what that means. The whole colossal effort, the quarrying, the carving, the building, was done by people who didn't live here. They traveled to it, they worked on it together as a project, and then they went back to their dispersed camps. That makes it more staggering. The social glue for this wasn't neighbors, it was a shared belief, a belief strong enough to coordinate labor across distance, across time. The temple didn't grow from a town. It summoned a temporary town, season after season, to build it, which reinforces an idea, monumental architecture, and the complex society to create it. It might not be the end product of settled farming life. It might be the thing that pulled people toward that life. The need to support these gatherings, these large-scale events, could have planted the first seeds of change. Literally, the desire to reliably feed the builders, the celebrants, that might have encouraged the first deliberate cultivation of wild grasses. The organization required to build the circles could have refined roles. Leaders, planners, Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament, not to what its builders had already achieved in their daily lives, but to what they could create together for a higher purpose. It suggests the human impulse to build meaning into the world. That might be one of our oldest catalysts, one of our most powerful. Göbekli Tepe was never alone. For a long time, we thought that was the puzzle. How could something like that exist by itself? But that's changed now. There's another site, Karahan Tepe. It's about 30 miles away, and they found the same things there. The huge T-shaped pillars, the circles cut right into the rock, and it's just as old, over 11,000 years. It's not a copy, it's a companion site. So Göbekli Tepe wasn't a single cathedral out in the wild. It was part of a constellation. Researchers have a name for it now, the Taş Tepeler. The stone hills, at least a dozen major sites all across southeastern Anatolia, all from the same era, all with the same kind of features. Each one is a ritual center. A place for gathering, for building monuments. That changes the whole picture. One strange site you can maybe explain, but a dozen of them spread out like that. That's a civilization, a whole cultural horizon we didn't know about, right as the Ice Age was ending. You have to picture that landscape 11,000 years ago. Across these hills, different groups of hunter-gatherers, Each group may be in its own territory, but they were all doing the same thing, building these sanctuaries. Carving the same symbols, following the same plan. That means a shared belief system, something so powerful it went beyond any single band of people. It was a common language and they wrote it in stone. This network means cooperation, on a scale we never thought possible for that time. To quarry those megaliths, to move them, that took labor. But it also took knowledge, how to shape the limestone, how to engineer those enclosures. That knowledge had to be shared. Artisans probably traveled between the sites. Ritual specialists too. Ideas moved around. This was a connected world, a cultural sphere, long before writing, long before empires, so the mystery gets bigger. It's not just how one site was built. It's why a whole region was transformed like this. What shared experience did these people have? What belief unified them? Was it the changing climate, some kind of spiritual awakening? The Taş Tepeler Complex shows us the revolution at Göbekli Tepe wasn't local, it was regional. A coordinated flowering, human creativity, communal purpose right at the dawn of our current age. This wasn't a first stumbling step. It was a confident statement. And they made it in stone all across those hills. The period around Göbekli Tepe, the pre-pottery Neolithic A, was a few centuries, roughly 9,600 to 8,800 BC. Across that region, from the Jordan Valley up into Turkey, things were shifting. You had places like Jericho. Even then, Jericho was a settled spot. They had round houses. There were signs they were starting to manage plants, a step toward cultivation. Life was becoming more anchored to a place. Göbekli Tepe belongs to that same period. That same wave, but it's a completely different expression of it. Jericho was building homes, walls, domestic life. Göbekli Tepe invested in none of that. No houses, no walls. All its effort, that staggering labor, went into something else. Into ideology given a stone form. It fits the context of social complexity, but it channels all that complexity in one direction. A ceremonial direction. It's as if one society built a fortified town, and another, just as capable, built a cathedral. Both show a new ability to organize, to plan, to work together toward a shared goal. But the goals themselves were completely different. That comparison matters. It means Göbekli Tepe wasn't some miracle dropped onto an empty landscape. It was part of the conversation of its time, the most extreme voice in that conversation. The people who built it were facing the same changes as their neighbors. Climate shifts, new social possibilities, a changing relationship with the natural world, but their response was uniquely focused. They answered those changes not by fortifying a settlement, but by constructing a cosmology. Their complexity is measured in tonnage, in carved limestone, in the coordination of seasonal labor, not in stored grain or household goods. Looking at it this way shows something. It shows the diversity of paths our early ancestors took. There was no single blueprint after the Ice Age. Some communities moved toward villages, toward early farming. Others, like the builders at Taş Tepeler, moved toward monumental ritual centers, sustained by foraging and hunting. They were exploring different ways of being human, of structuring society, of understanding their place in the world. Göbekli Tepe is the most powerful testament to that other path, the path not taken, or the path that was taken and then buried. It proves the journey toward civilization wasn't a straight, narrow road. It was a wide field of branching possibilities. Our history is richer, stranger. The progression wasn't always from camp to town to temple. Sometimes the temple came first, and it called everything else into being. The stones and the soil held another secret. In the fill that buried the enclosures, they found human skull fragments, but these weren't just remains. They were modified, deliberately altered. Some had deep grooves carved into them, others had small, carefully drilled holes, and some had traces of ochre, that red pigment used in ritual. These weren't isolated finds. Other sites from the same era across the region have turned up similar modified skulls, so it was a shared practice. Researchers sometimes call it a skull cult, though that term might suggest more mystery than we really know. It points to a form of veneration, a ritual treatment of the dead, and you have to think about that. These people were carving the wild world into pillars, this monumental project. But their spiritual vision didn't stop with the animal kingdom. It included their own lineage, their ancestors. Modifying these skulls implies a deep, complex relationship with death. With what might lie beyond, it was a way of keeping the past present actively within the community. Maybe the skulls were displayed or carried in ceremonies. The ochre stain could have symbolized life or blood or a sacred connection. The holes might have allowed them to be suspended or to hold inserts. This was more than burial. It was curation, an active engagement with the remains, and it adds a new layer to the site's purpose. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a temple to the forces of nature, to the boar and the crane. It was also a place of memory, a nexus for the relationship between the living and those who came before. The ancestors became part of the spiritual architecture as much as the T-shaped pillars. Their treated skulls were likely powerful relics, tangible links to a collective past, used to legitimize traditions or unite clans or channel wisdom. It shows a belief system of real depth, one that organized not just space but time. It connected the present community to its history, to a hoped-for continuity. And the care in this practice, the precise drilling, the selection of pigment, it mirrors the care in the stonework. Both were acts of reverence, both were ways of making the intangible tangible. Giving form to belief, so the spiritual world had multiple dimensions. It included the dangerous, powerful animals on the pillars, and it included the honored, modified skulls of their forebears. Together, they formed a complete cosmology, a way of understanding humanity's place between the wild earth and the ancestral chain. This skull cult isn't a morbid footnote. It's central evidence, proof that the ideology that built the first temples was rich and layered and utterly concerned with the biggest questions: where we come from and what remains of us. The sky above those circles was vast and unchanging. Some researchers think the builders weren't just watching it, they were mapping it. The layout of the enclosures could be a celestial code. Certain pillars, especially the central ones, might align with the rising of specific stars. Sirius, the brightest star, is a prime candidate. Or maybe they marked the solstices, those moments when the sun reaches its farthest points. If that's true, then the people of Göbekli Tepe were doing more than building a temple. They were building an observatory, a stone calendar, aligning their rituals with the rhythm of the cosmos. The animal carvings might be part of that language. That scorpion on a pillar, it could be more than a symbol of danger. It might be the constellation Scorpius. The birds could stand for Cygnus or Aquila. They weren't just decorating stones with wild beasts. They could have been illustrating the sky above, telling stories written in stars. This practice, turning star patterns into animal forms, we see it in cultures across the globe much later. But here it is, potentially at the very dawn. That changes our view of their knowledge. Tracking the slow drift of stars requires careful, generation-spanning observation. It implies a tradition, a deliberate effort to find patterns to predict celestial events. They would have needed to pass this down, elder to apprentice, for centuries. To encode it in architecture was to make it permanent, to anchor their myths to the earth and the heavens at once. This astronomical thread connects Göbekli Tepe to a much wider story. Thousands of years later, thousands of miles away, other cultures built stone circles aligned with the sun and stars, Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain. The solar markers of the Maya, Göbekli Tepe suggests this impulse, this desire to read the sky and build its order into our world, might be one of humanity's oldest shared projects. It wasn't a discovery of the agricultural age. It was a pursuit of the hunter-gatherer mind, gazing up from a hill in Anatolia. Seeking order in the cosmos might have been a foundational need. In a world still wild and unpredictable, the heavens offered a different story, one of cycles, of return, of predictable beauty. By carving those patterns into pillars, they were trying to grasp that order, to bring it down to earth, to make the eternal cycles part of their ritual life. The temple becomes a bridge, not just between people, but between the human community and the cosmic community. A place where the stories of the earth and the stories of the sky were told as one. The practical demands were just staggering. You're trying to build this place on a barren hilltop. How do you feed hundreds of workers gathered there for months? The answer is in the bones and seeds they left behind. Archaeologists sifting through the fill found a huge volume of animal remains. Bones from gazelle, from aurochs, these massive wild cattle, from wild sheep. And these weren't just a few family meals, this was thousands of animals. The scale is immense. It tells you there were organized hunting parties, skilled teams going out into the plains and coming back with enough meat to feed a small city of laborers. This was provisioning on an industrial level long before industry, a feasting economy centered entirely on supporting the sacred work, but meat wasn't the whole story. The same soil held another clue, a finer one, microscopic traces of wild cereals, einkorn wheat, barley, and these grains showed signs of being processed, threshed, ground. This wasn't casual foraging. This was the systematic harvesting and preparation of wild grains, again on a massive scale. To feed the builders, they weren't just hunting. They were managing the landscape, harvesting fields of wild wheat, probably from the fertile slopes nearby, bringing it all to the hill to be turned into flour and bread. And this is where the theory gets compelling. That logistical challenge, the need to reliably feed a large, non-food producing population for generations, that may have been the practical crucible. Imagine the pressure, hundreds of mouths to feed every season. You can't just rely on the luck of the hunt. You need a predictable, storable food source. So you start to pay closer attention to those wild grasses. You learn where they grow best. You might clear competing plants away. You save seeds from the best, most productive stalks. And without even intending to start a revolution, you're taking the first unconscious steps toward cultivation. The ritual necessity of building the temple created a new social and economic problem. And the solution to that problem may have been the slow, accidental birth of agriculture. The first farms might not have been born from a desire for private property or surplus wealth. They might have been born from a communal need to feed a sacred vision. The bread that sustained the builders of the first temple could have been the seed of the world that followed. Who was in charge? You look at these stones, this massive result, and the command behind it is invisible. The usual answer is a king, a single ruler who could command thousands. But that feels wrong here. There were no palaces, no royal tombs, so the leadership had to be different, something from that earlier, more fluid world. The debate comes down to three ideas. The first is powerful chiefs, individuals or families with enough influence, maybe from hunting skill or wisdom, to coordinate labor across different groups. They'd be the organizers, the ones to settle design disputes, direct the work, but that kind of personal authority usually leaves traces, richer burials, special houses. At Göbekli Tepe, we don't see that. Evidence for stark inequality isn't there. Then there's the shaman model. Here, the force isn't a political ruler, but a spiritual visionary. A person or a class of people who could interpret the world of animals and ancestors, channel the beliefs that united everyone. Their authority came from a connection to the sacred. They'd be the architects of meaning, dictating which animals went on which pillars, orchestrating the rituals that made the labor itself a holy act. In this view, the temple wasn't built by command, but by inspired collaboration. People worked because they believed in the vision, not because they were told. The third theory is maybe the most interesting. It suggests a society organized not by a top-down hierarchy, but by collaboration between groups. Think of it as a guild system or a society of clans. Each family or band might have been responsible for a single pillar or even a whole enclosure. They'd take pride in their contribution, competing in a friendly, ritual way to create the most impressive carving. This idea finds support in the stones. Archaeologists see that the quality of carving, the style of the animals, even the workmanship changes from one enclosure to another. One circle has beautifully executed, deep reliefs. Another has simpler, more rushed work. This variation suggests different hands, different groups working with slightly different skills and traditions. They were all following the same grand plan, the T-shape, the circular layout, but they put their own stamp on it. This ambiguity about leadership is itself a clue. It forces us to expand what we think early society could be. We're conditioned to think of power as crowns and thrones, but at the dawn of monument building, authority might have been more fluid. Rotational, tied to the ritual calendar, or distributed, shared among elders and specialists. The project itself might have been the leader, the shared goal that temporarily organized people into a structure that dissolved when the work was done. This points to a social complexity that doesn't fit our later templates. It was likely consensus-based, rooted in kinship and shared belief, yet capable of staggering coordinated effort. They built like a state, but they lived like a community, and that might be the most revolutionary idea, that our first great collaboration didn't require a tyrant to force it. It might have sprung from a collective yes, the deliberate burial of those stone circles. It wasn't an ending, more like a punctuation mark, a full stop. Around 8000 BC, the great building phase at Göbekli Tepe stopped. The last enclosures were filled in, no new ones were built, and this moment it isn't isolated. It lines up exactly with a shift across the whole region. This is the period when agriculture, which might have once supported temple feasts, really took hold. When permanent villages became the norm, mud brick houses, stored harvests, the world that built Göbekli Tepe was fading. A new world was being born from seeds its rituals may have encouraged. One interpretation is that the sanctuary's purpose just reached its natural conclusion. The belief system behind it was a product of the hunter-gatherer mind. Its symbols were the wild animals, the dangerous ones from the untamed plains. Its social engine was the seasonal pilgrimage, dispersed bands coming together for a shared sacred purpose. But as people settled down to tend fields and herds, their whole relationship with the world changed. Survival became tied to the cycle of domesticated crops, to the boundaries of owned land, to the patience required for a seed to sprout. The volatile world of the aurochs and the lion was receding, physically and spiritually. A new cosmology was needed, one centered on fertility, on earth and rain, on protecting the harvest and the home, so the careful burial of Göbekli Tepe looks less like abandonment, more like a ritual of transition, a respectful closing of a sacred chapter. The old powers in those pillars and carved beasts weren't discarded. They were perhaps seen as too potent, too anchored in a passing age to be left active in the new one. By entombing the circles, the community wasn't erasing its past, it was integrating it. They were laying the old wild gods to rest, even as they began to pray to new ones of grain and soil. The act itself bridges the two worlds. It shows a deep continuity of thought. They honored their origins even as they moved beyond them. This transition helps explain why the Taş Tepeler sites, this whole constellation of sanctuaries, weren't rebuilt. The social and spiritual energy that once went into monumental ritual construction was channeled into new forms, into building larger, more complex villages, into creating new art, pottery, figurines that reflected domestic and agricultural life. the immense effort to move a 16-ton pillar was now directed toward irrigation canals. Granaries, defensive walls, so Göbekli Tepe's end isn't a mystery of collapse. It's a key to understanding a successful adaptation. The very forces it may have set in motion, the organization, the large-scale cooperation, the resource management ultimately created a society that no longer needed its original catalyst. The temple had done its work. It helped forge the social tools that made a settled, agricultural life possible. And once that new life was secured, the sanctuary, with its wild soul, was gently returned to the earth. Its burial marks the moment the seedling of civilization, which it helped nurture, finally broke through the soil and began to grow in the sun. Göbekli Tepe sends a shockwave. It forces a global reconsideration. If hunter-gatherers in Anatolia could coordinate like that 12,000 years ago, why assume it was a one-time event? The old map of human progress, with the Middle East as the sole cradle, starts to look incomplete. It challenges a core assumption that monumentality, the drive to build huge, permanent things, is only a product of farming societies. Societies with kings and granaries, but what if that drive is something else, something more fundamental? Look at the megaliths of Europe, Stonehenge, that ring on Salisbury Plain. Its great stones were raised around 4,500 years ago. For a long time, it was seen as an achievement of a settled farming society. But Göbekli Tepe is 6,000 years older. It asks a new question. Could the knowledge behind Stonehenge have deeper roots? Could it be part of a tradition, a way of thinking about landscape and cosmos that stretches back to a time before farming even reached those shores? The monuments of Europe might not be a late invention. They could be a flowering of a very old seed. Cross the Atlantic to North America, the early mound-building cultures like Poverty Point in Louisiana. Massive earthen structures, complex geometric designs, built by hunter-gatherer societies over 3,000 years ago, they were explained as anomalies. But seen through the lens of Göbekli Tepe, they look less like outliers. They look more like evidence of a pattern where complex social organization and landscape-altering projects emerge from a ceremonial core. Not necessarily from an agricultural surplus. This reframes our entire view of global prehistory. Instead of a single story of civilization spreading from one point, we might be looking at a tapestry. Multiple, independent wellsprings of social complexity, bubbling up in different environments at different times, each responding to its own spiritual and social pressures. The common thread isn't wheat or barley. It might be the human mind itself, an innate capacity, even a need to externalize belief, to make the sacred visible and permanent in the world. The ideological purpose comes first, the gathering, the shared story, the need to mark a place as profoundly significant. That need can mobilize people. It can forge the social structures necessary to move a 16-ton pillar, or to move 1 million baskets of earth. Agriculture, then, becomes one possible tool that such a mobilized society might adopt. Not the prerequisite that makes society possible. This perspective is liberating. It gives agency back to our ancestors everywhere. It suggests the leap toward complexity wasn't a single switch that flipped only in the Fertile Crescent. It was a potential lying dormant in human communities across the globe, waiting for the right idea, the right vision to unlock it. Göbekli Tepe is the proof. Proof that this potential was realized far earlier and under far different conditions than we ever dreamed. Its silent stones are a call to look at every ancient monument with fresh eyes, to listen for the echoes of that first profound human impulse, to build meaning together into the very bones of the earth. A challenge like that to history is going to get pushback. Not everyone agrees on what Göbekli Tepe means. Some say we should be careful not to treat it as a total anomaly. They point to other sites. Jerf el Omar in Syria is a few centuries older. There, people built large, round communal buildings. They're not as spectacular as the T-pillars, but they show this impulse to create shared architectural space was emerging in several places. So Göbekli Tepe might be the most extreme version of a wider trend, not a lone miracle. Then there's the question of the builders. Were they purely hunter-gatherers? Some think the scale of the feasting suggests a deeper relationship with wild grains. To feed hundreds of people, you'd need systematic harvesting that might have already crossed into what's called incipient cultivation. A gray area between gathering and farming where people manage wild stands, encourage growth. If that's true, then Göbekli Tepe could sit right at that moment of transition. Not entirely before farming, that softens the revolutionary idea a bit. It suggests the temple and early farming developed together, each one fueling the other. And the enclosures themselves, the main view is they were purely ritual spaces, temples, but another interpretation wonders if we're imposing our own categories. Could these circles have been large communal houses roofed over for seasonal gatherings, or maybe they were multi-functional sites, part ceremonial center, part workshop, part trading ground, part temporary home? In that reading, the stunning art served a social purpose, marking clan identities, recording events in a space used for many aspects of life. That doesn't diminish the site. It grounds it in a more practical, layered reality. Engaging with these critiques isn't about disproving Göbekli Tepe's significance. It's about refining it. It shows that rewriting history is a living process, a conversation. The stones don't change, but our understanding of them evolves through challenge and debate. This site forces the questions, but the answers are complex. They exist in shades of gray, between hunting and farming, between the sacred and the communal. That complexity is what makes it compelling. It resists a simple, tidy narrative. Instead, it offers a richer, messier, more human story. A world in profound flux, where people were experimenting with new ways to live and work and believe together. The debate itself is a testament to the site's power, to make us rethink everything we thought we knew. The world wasn't stable. They were living through the younger dryas. A final cold snap, a sudden return to near glacial conditions that lasted over 1,000 years, right at the end of the last ice age. So you had landscapes that had been warming, slowly offering more, and then they tightened again. Herds shifted, plant foods became less reliable, the weather turned unpredictable. For communities living close to the land, it was an era of profound uncertainty. Survival became a more complex puzzle. In that kind of pressured environment, the old ways' small, isolated family bands might have reached a limit. The challenge demanded a new response. And the response may have been those stone circles on the hill. When the physical world becomes unstable, people often turn to the symbolic world for stability. Building something permanent together can be an act of defiance against chaos. The shared labor of raising those pillars would have forged incredibly strong social bonds. It created a collective identity much larger than any single clan. You're no longer just the people who hunt gazelle in one valley. You're the people who built the enclosure with the great fox stone. That shared identity becomes a form of social insurance. In hard times, you have a wider network to rely on. Knowledge could be pooled where the aurochs are moving, which slopes still have wild grains. The ritual gatherings themselves became a mechanism for redistributing resources, for sharing food and information across a broad region. So the sanctuary may have been more than a temple. It could have been a brilliant social adaptation, a way to turn environmental stress into social glue. The very act of coming together to create something enduring provided a psychological anchor. While the climate shifted and the winds blew cold, they were making their own center of gravity, a fixed point in a changing world, built from their own hands and shared belief. This reframes the monument. It might not be a sign of leisurely surplus of people with time on their hands. It could be a sign of ingenious resilience. A community investing immense effort not in spite of hardship but because of it. They channeled the anxiety of a changing planet into a collective project. And that project, in turn, strengthened their ability to face that change. The stones stand as a testament to a truth that our greatest collaborations are often born not in times of plenty, but in times of shared need. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who found the place, he saw the carvings and thought they were more than art. He had this idea of symbolic storage in a world with no writing, no written words at all. How do you keep the important things, your stories, your laws, how you see the world? You put them into symbols. You carve them into something that lasts longer than a person. Longer than a voice. These pillars at Göbekli Tepe, they became that, a kind of library, a permanent memory outside of anyone's mind for a whole culture. So each animal, each symbol on those stones, it wasn't just decoration. It was like a chapter or a rule, a piece of who they were made solid. Think of everything a society knows as a big, complicated story. If it's only spoken, that story is fragile. It lives in the memory of the elders. It changes a little every time it's told, with every new generation. Details get lost, things get emphasized differently, but if you take the heart of that story, the powerful spirits, the sacred connections, the rules for how to live, and you carve them into these huge blocks of limestone. 18 tons each, that changes everything. The story gets fixed. It becomes a reference. A young person learning their people's ways wouldn't just hear it from an elder. They could go and see it, touch it, point to a great snake carved around a pillar and ask what it means, and the answer becomes a lesson, anchored in stone. That shifts how we see the place. It wasn't just for performing rituals, it was for encoding them, for making the intangible permanent. So Göbekli Tepe becomes, in a way, an early experiment in information technology. A hard drive for the Neolithic mind, all that immense labor to build it. It wasn't just about making a sacred space, it was about creating continuity. Making sure the beliefs, the social bonds, the identity of these scattered hunter-gatherer groups would survive, unchanged for centuries. The temple was an archive. The sanctuary was a school. It moves the monument from a place of worship to a foundational institution, the bedrock of their collective memory. When they built it, they weren't just speaking to their gods. They were speaking to their grandchildren's grandchildren, in a language of stone they believed would never be forgotten. We have the cathedral, but we don't have the houses. That's the missing half. If hundreds of people were coming to Göbekli Tepe season after season to work, they came from somewhere and they went back somewhere. The site itself is so clean, so empty of everyday life. It pushes you outward into the valleys around it. So that's where the search has gone, using surveys, aerial images. And they've started to find things, a constellation of smaller sites around the great hill, not monumental, subtle, scatters of flint, pieces of grinding stones. The faint outlines of shelters, what you'd expect from seasonal camps, places people lived when they weren't building. This changes the picture, from one stunning mystery to a social system you can understand. Each small camp was probably a family, a clan. Most of the year, they lived mobile lives hunting gazelle, harvesting wild grasses on those fertile slopes. Then, when the time was right, maybe a season, maybe a star event, they'd pack up, make the journey to the hill, join the temporary workforce, give their labor to the sacred project. Then return home. That rhythm tied it together, the monumental and the mundane, the ritual center and the domestic base, two halves of one cultural heartbeat. Finding these settlements is crucial because they show us the whole person, not just the ritual carver, the parent, the hunter, the toolmaker. They show the economic underpinnings, how food, resources, moved from home territories to support the communal effort. It turns Göbekli Tepe from an isolated temple into the centerpiece of a living network, a network of people moving across a landscape they knew intimately. bound by a shared vision, a vision powerful enough to draw them back again and again to a windy hilltop to move mountains. The sophistication in those pillars makes you reconsider the human mind. Göbekli Tepe's artistry and complexity point to a cognitive revolution that probably happened much earlier than we thought. Looking at those T-shaped forms, seeing the foxes and cranes carved so deliberately, you're seeing a mind fully capable of abstract thought. These weren't just pictures of things they saw, they were symbols, representations of ideas or spirits or clan identities. That leap from depicting reality to encoding meaning, that's a signature of the modern human brain. And here it is in monumental form over 11,000 years ago. That pushes against a long-held story. For decades, the great creative explosion was pinned to the cave art of Europe around 40,000 years ago. Places like Shovet, with its lifelike horses and lions, were seen as the moment our cognitive switch flipped, the dawn of symbolic imagination. Göbekli Tepe doesn't contradict that moment, but it expands what came after. It shows this cognitive modernity wasn't a one-time event that then lay dormant. It was a toolkit, a set of mental capacities that different cultures could apply in very different ways across tens of thousands of years. In Europe, that creativity went onto cave walls, intimate, hidden, deep in the earth. In Anatolia, millennia later, that same capacity for symbol and story erupted onto the surface. It became architectural and social and staggeringly organized, so the question shifts. It's no longer about when we became cognitively modern. The evidence suggests we had been for a very long time. The real mystery is how we applied that modernity, how different environments, different social pressures, could channel the same basic human mind toward such different expressions. A hidden painting in a French cave and a 50-ton stone circle in Turkey, they're branches from the same cognitive tree. The planning alone shows a mind thinking across scales of time that are hard to grasp. To conceive a project that would take decades, even centuries, to finish. To design enclosures that would outlive everyone there at the start. To carve instructions or stories into stone so future builders would understand the vision. That's long-term thinking of a very high order. It requires not just intelligence but a shared cultural memory, a way of passing complex ideas across generations without writing. That points to a rich oral tradition, to ritual, to a social structure deep enough to hold a vision steady over lifetimes. So Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament not to a sudden awakening, but to the patient application of an ancient human brilliance. It tells us the minds that gathered there were, in their essential capacities, no different from our own. They faced a different world with different challenges, and they used their modern cognition to build a solution in limestone, a solution focused on community, meaning, and a connection to the cosmos. Their masterpiece reframes the timeline of human ingenuity. It suggests our creative potential has always been vast, just waiting for the right circumstance to build its dreams into the hills. The stone is a record, but it's fragile. Exposing Göbekli Tepe means protecting it from the things that actually kept it safe all this time. That limestone, once buried, is vulnerable now. Wind scours it, rain gets in the cracks and freezes, prying the carvings apart. Sunlight fades the details. Every day it's out in the open, there's a slow erosion. So the archaeology here, it isn't just digging, it's a race, a careful dance between finding things and keeping them safe. The teams on site, they're conservators as much as excavators. They use soft brushes, dental picks, they document everything. When a new pillar comes up, the first question is how to shield it. Usually, the answer is a shelter. A big, open-sided canopy. It breaks the wind and rain but lets people see the monument. These structures, they're a modern layer, a necessary one between our world and that ancient one. It speaks to a responsibility. The goal isn't just to find something anymore. It's to make sure what's found survives, for the next generation to ask their questions. That balance defines everything, every decision, where to dig next, how to support a leaning stone. It's all weighed against the risk of loss. The past, once you reveal it, becomes a charge for the future. And the work is so slow. After decades, they think only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe is uncovered. The hill probably holds more circles, more stories still wrapped in earth. Each season, the careful work might show another animal coming out of the stone, or a whole new enclosure that shifts the story again. This gradual unveiling, it feels like a parallel. Our understanding of human history is being rewritten, not in a flash but piece by deliberate piece. Each new finding is another sentence in a story we're just starting to read. The patience you need mirrors the patience of the builders themselves, and with that uncovering comes another modern force, the weight of our own fascination. The site's fame draws people from all over. That attention is a double-edged sword. It brings support, recognition, but also the threat of wear. Pathways need reinforcement. Viewing platforms have to be designed to minimize impact. Loving a place can unintentionally harm it. Managing that interest is now part of the site's story. How do you share a wonder without diminishing it? The answer, like the archaeology, involves constant adaptation and care, so the work continues season after season. A quiet, meticulous conversation with the ground. What emerges is a new kind of timeline, not just of the distant past, but of our present relationship with it. Each protected pillar, each sheltered enclosure, is a testament to a simple idea. Some discoveries are too important to just be found. They have to be kept. Göbekli Tepe makes you rethink everything about our past. The old story was a ladder, hunting, then farming, then cities and temples, each step built on the last. It was a simple line of progress, moving from simple to complex. This site breaks that ladder. What you get instead is a tangle of possibilities. History isn't a straight line. It's a process, a messy process, a human process of trial and error, different groups choosing different ways to live. You see multiple pathways. Some communities, like Jericho, they built walls and houses. Others, like the people on this hill, they built cosmology into stone. Both were sophisticated. Both needed complex social organization, but they pointed that complexity in opposite directions. One toward the fortified town, the other toward the ceremonial center. For a long time, the path to towns and farming was the only one we could see. It was the path that won. It shaped our world. Göbekli Tepe shows the other path, the path not taken, or maybe the path that was taken, explored completely, and then set aside. Its existence proves nothing was predetermined. There was no single blueprint for civilization. This brings a kind of humility. For over a century, we measured the past by our own yardstick. We assumed what came before was simpler, just waiting to become us. Göbekli Tepe is a rebuke to that. It shows that 12,000 years ago, human minds and societies could conceive and execute projects of staggering scale. Their capabilities went far beyond the boxes we built for them. They weren't primitive precursors. They were our cognitive equals, navigating a different world with different priorities. Their masterpiece wasn't in grain or palaces. It was in shared meaning carved into bedrock. The drivers of this complexity turn out to be more mysterious than economics. We thought surplus extra food was the essential fuel. That material security had to come first. Göbekli Tepe suggests the fuel might have been ideological. A shared belief, a compelling story, could mobilize people on a scale that practicality alone might not. The need to create meaning, to gather for ritual, to build a bridge to the cosmos. These intangible forces could forge the social bonds and structures that later enabled other things. The temple wasn't a luxury afforded by farming. It might have been the social invention that made farming conceivable. It reframes the engine of history, placing human imagination and spiritual yearning at the very heart of our ascent. So what you learn from this hilltop isn't just a fact about ancient Turkey. It's a new framework for understanding humanity. Our story isn't one of inevitable progress on a single track. It's a story of branching paths, cultural flowering in unexpected places, brilliance in forms we're only starting to recognize. Göbekli Tepe is a reminder that the past holds surprises that can upend our most cherished narratives. And if this one site could rewrite the first chapter of civilization, it makes you wonder what other chapters, still buried, might change the story of who we are. Göbekli Tepe is this place made of stone, a silent thing. It's a challenge really carved right into the limestone. For a long time, the story we told ourselves was straightforward. It was a neat line, a progression from simple life to complex life. But this site, coming out of the ground in Turkey, it dismantles that. It makes us rewrite the history of civilization from the very beginning. Not just adding a note, but questioning the whole narrative. We've seen how old it is. It's older than any benchmark we had, and its monumental scale that required a social engine. We didn't think hunter-gatherers had that, and the artistry there, the carvings, they point to a symbolic world, a rich one, a deep one. Each of these facts chips away at the old sequence. The idea that farming had to come first, that you needed villages before you could have temples, that sequence is in pieces now. What comes out of the dust is a different story. A more human one. It suggests the spark for settled life might not have been a practical thing, not a calculation about grain. It might have been a shared dream. A need to create meaning together, to enact ritual, to build a bridge to something beyond. That spiritual hunger, that social hunger, could have been the original catalyst. The thing that first brought people together in large, coordinated groups. So the temple wasn't a product of an established society. It might have been the project that established society. And that insight, it changes more than a timeline. It reimagines a capacity, the human spirit's capacity for organization, for art, for putting our deepest questions into the world around us. That capacity was there. It flourished long before kings, before bureaucracies, before written law. It was present in people who followed the herds, who gathered under vast, ancient skies. They weren't primitive, they were architects of meaning. Their legacy isn't a list of inventions, it's a demonstration. A profound demonstration of what people can do when they're united by a vision. A vision greater than themselves, and when you reflect on that, it's a reminder. Our understanding of the past is always provisional. It's built on fragments. The pieces we've found, Göbekli Tepe was one fragment, and it overturned a paradigm, so you have to wonder what other assumptions are buried, waiting for a trowel's edge or a satellite's gaze to bring them to light. What other chapters of our story are still hidden, ready to surprise us? The past is never as simple as it seems. It's always more imaginative, more complex, more wondrous than we dare to assume.